Welcome, everyone. I want to welcome you today to our discussion of current approaches to improvement of college and university teaching. I think it'll be a very topical subject, and I think it's one that'll generate a lot of interest. So I really look forward to today's presentation by our three speakers. I'm George Blumenthal. I'm the director of the Berkeley Center for Studies in Higher Education and the former chancellor at UC Santa Cruz, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. But the discussion will provide an opportunity for audience participation as well. For those of you who've tuned in, if you have questions you'd like us to ask the participants in the panel, please add them to the chat in YouTube, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So do feel that you have an opportunity to raise questions. And if we can't get to all the questions, maybe we can even do some of them by email later on. But the key point is you do have an opportunity to provide some questions to us to ask. Let me now turn to our three speakers today, all very eminent scholars in higher education. First is Erin Paulus, who is the Arthur Gates Professor of Sociology and Education and chair of the Department of Education Policy and Social Analysis at Teachers College at Columbia University. He's also taught at Johns Hopkins University, Michigan State, Northwestern, and has served as a statistician for the National Center for Education Statistics in the US Department of Education. Paulus's efforts to strengthen the capacity of research to enhance educational discourse in the public sphere draws on his studies of the linkages between education policy and inequalities in life chances, and the role of schooling in the course of human lives. His research has also addressed the sociology of teaching and teachers' work and careers, including teacher accountability systems, undergraduate teaching improvement, and the preparation of education researchers. He's a fellow of the American Education Research Association and an elected member of the National Academy of Education and of the Sociological Research Association, the preeminent honorary society of sociology scholars. Our second speaker will be Corbin Campbell. She's an associate dean of academic affairs and an associate professor in the School of Education at American University. Her research examines three interrelated streams: college teaching, assessments of higher education quality, and the organizational environments that support faculty in thriving in their careers. Prior to coming to American University, Dr. Campbell was associate professor in the higher and post-secondary education program at Teachers College, Columbia University. Dr. Campbell serves on several editorial boards, including Review of Higher Education and Review of Educational Research. In 2015, Dr. Campbell was awarded the National Academy of Education Spencer Postdoctoral Fellowship. She also served on a committee of the National Academies to assess interpersonal and intrapersonal competencies in college, and a committee of the National Center of Education Statistics, revising the national post-secondary sample surveys. And our final presenter is Richard Aram, who's the Dean of the School of Education and Professor of Education, and by courtesy, Sociology, Criminology, Law, and Society at the University of California, Irvine. He recently served as Senior Fellow at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and as Director of the Education Research Program at the Social Science Research Council, where he oversaw the development of the Research Alliance for New York for the New York City schools, a research consortium designed to conduct ongoing evaluation of the New York City schools. He's the author of Judging School Discipline, A Crisis of Moral Authority, published by Harvard University Press. He's the co-author of Aspiring Adults Adrift, Tentative Transitions of College Graduates, published by the University of Chicago Press, and Academically Adrift, Limited Learning on College Campuses, University of Chicago Press. He's been co-editor of Improving Quality in Higher Education, in American Higher Education, Learning Outcomes and Assessment for the 21st Century. and several other books as well. Frankly, too numerous to name in the short time we have available. So having introduced our three speakers, I want to now start with the presentations, and we'll begin with Erin Pullis. Erin?
Thank you, George. I hope that you'll all let me know if you're seeing the screen appropriately and give me thumbs ups or other signals if I screw it up, which has been known to happen. I'm so grateful to be here, so grateful to the Center for featuring college teaching. It's a topic that doesn't always get a lot of play. I'll start by framing the problem of college teaching within some broad critiques of the current crisis in higher education. And I start with what I call American ambivalence, the fact that Americans are fundamentally ambivalent about higher education. We value education because credentials can be exchanged in the labor market, not for the love of learning. The American dream in relation to education has always taught us, get an education and you'll get ahead. Get an education and the country will get ahead. But we know that education cannot equalize social and economic inequality, and many who seek a four-year college degree don't complete one. High school and then college were seen as good investments while the economy was expanding through much of the 20th century. But the payoff has become less certain as daily life has become less certain, particularly these days. The current pandemic has only exacerbated anxieties about college and career. Even though college education and a college degree have long been viewed as a good investment, today, young adults can't count on a degree to help them navigate the gig economy or to support a standard of living that will enable them to pay off the rising costs of college. This wouldn't be as big an issue in a society that provided more of a social safety net for health and retirement, but the US has long relied on the private sector to cover these, and thus the coverage has been very patchwork. We also see declining public confidence in higher education, especially from those who identify as conservative. And other than the financial payoff of a college degree, Richard Aram's work has taught us that we don't really know what students learn in college and why it matters. So in response, there have been a number of reform movements responding to this perceived crisis. And I'm going to mention three of them, which I refer to as power it up, blow it up, and stay the course. Power it up is a group of scholars and advocates who I call techno-optimists. They think that changing technology, the capacity to harness technological advances in big data via artificial intelligence, machine learning, the increased reach of the web can lead to customized delivery of higher education and customized credentials. And it's a very exciting possibility, but I think at the moment, in the details, it's very much pop neuroscience. We're nowhere near getting to that point yet. Another perspective, blow it up. And this is a point of view that's most clearly expressed in the work of economist Brian Kaplan, who argues that students should bypass higher education and employers should ignore post-secondary credentials because students don't learn anything in college that contributes to their workplace productivity. This critique relies on a pretty narrow view that the purpose of schooling is just preparing young people for work. And not surprisingly, that has evoked a reaction from what I term the defenders of liberal education, who repudiate a narrow economic purpose to higher education and argue that higher education is about the search for meaning in life and the cultivation of habits of mind that allow individuals to think critically about the world and how they might act in and on it. And if you call students customers, these defenders of liberal education will cut you. What's striking about these critiques is that none of them put college teaching at the center of higher education. And yet, good college teaching matters. We know this. We know this from the K-12 world. And it's a short extrapolation from what we've learned about teaching and learning in elementary and secondary schools. And we know it from the post-secondary world, where, for example, meta-analyses about college teaching practices and student performance in STEM fields make clear that teaching practices do have real consequences for how much and what students learn. My colleague Anna Newman and I developed an approach to teaching improvement that emphasizes what we term convergent teaching as a way of thinking about good college teaching. It's not the only such model, but it's one that we think is kind of useful. And in our view, the term convergent signifies a teacher's simultaneous attention to, thus a convergence of attention on, subject matter, the learner, and the context or milieu in which learning takes place. But there's another way that we think about convergence as well, and that is the obligation of a college teacher to jointly attend to cognition, emotion, and identity as attributes of individual learners. We draw on three big ideas emerging from the literature on teaching and learning in K-12 education over the past several decades. First, learning in higher education requires that a learner encounter and interact with a subject matter idea. So subject matter gets lifted up as a primary aspect of good college teaching. Second, student learning builds on what learners already know. And that implies a particular pedagogical approach. And finally, learning emerges when a student works through similarities and differences between their prior views and beliefs and new ideas that instructors or texts represent. These encounters have both cognitive and emotional features because that engagement between what learners think they already know and what they're being asked to learn may be congruent or may be very dissonant. And these ideas give rise to three pedagogical practices and orientations. The first of which we call targeting, carving out the big ideas that are to be taught in a particular course, that are generative and are building blocks for future learning. And one important corollary of targeting is you can't teach everything in a course. You have to focus and draw attention to the ideas that are most important, most salient, and most productive for future learning. A second pedagogical move, surfacing, exposing what students already know from their prior studies and experiences. And this knowledge can be either academic, things that are learned in prior classes, or cultural, formed in light of students' experiences in their homes and their communities. And finally, navigating, and surely coincidental, these all have nautical themes. Navigating involves orchestrating the movement from what students already know to what a teacher wants them to come to know, which involves a repertoire of instructional moves, such as the use of metaphor and analogy. And in the book that Anna and I wrote recently, which I'll be flogging incessantly through this 12 minutes, we developed a set of recommended campus level policies and practices to support this kind of teaching, including readying an institution for improving teaching, improving the professional development of college instructors, often through the work of campus teaching and learning centers, and preparing future faculty programs, and developing institutional policies and practices to support and reward good college teaching. And I've got a couple examples of that on this slide. Improving how teaching is evaluated and rewarding it, reducing reliance on student ratings of instruction in the evaluation of faculty performance, substituting, or at least adjuncting other durable artifacts of teaching practice and performance, such as peer observation, teaching portfolios, and faculty self-evaluations. And finally, building an institutional culture that supports teaching excellence by incorporating teaching into the faculty recruitment process, creating teaching excellence awards, and supporting endowed teaching professorships. Now, there are risks associated with this approach, but there's also considerable promise. The main risk is that undergraduate teaching improvement will not be taken up in a serious way. The reforms may be superficial, as there's a lot of confusion about what actually is good pedagogical practice. And we know that changing teaching practice doesn't happen after brief and intermittent professional development sessions. And reforms may fall flat for the reasons that are listed on this slide here. Now, most importantly, for teaching improvement to occur, college teachers have to think that changing their practice is important. And that's not always obvious. And if they don't, they won't take it up seriously. And this is not cheap to do well. There are real long-term costs associated with building an instructional guidance infrastructure to assume those costs. The promise is that undergraduate teaching improvement may take hold in particular niches in the higher education system, especially those that are buffered from external accountability pressures. And I list here some of the ones that I think are most likely. Community colleges and liberal arts colleges, which already make teaching an important part of their mission. Research universities, which are preparing the next generation of college teachers. And particular fields of study where disciplinary associations and federal agencies such as the National Science Foundation can play an important role. All of this gets a lot more attention in my book with Anna Newman, Convergent Teaching, Tools to Spark Deeper Learning in College, published about a year ago. And yes, that is a shameless plug. I'll turn things over to Corbin now.
Thank you, Aaron. That was great.
Wonderful. Aaron, I'm so pleased to be able, actually, it's hard to go after you, of course, but I do think that there are some really nice resonances. And just give me a second here to share my screen. All right. Can you all see the screen and my cursor? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Corbin Campbell, as was mentioned previously, and I really do feel like it is a distinct pleasure and privilege to be able to spend an hour talking about college teaching improvement, which we know is one of the college teaching is one of the most important and predictive factors for several student outcomes. This has been shown through many studies and compiled in one of the books that brings together most of the studies from the field of higher education, how college affects students. And so we know that college teaching is important, but as was mentioned previously, it often doesn't get quite the amount of discussion that it deserves. And today I'll be sharing a constellation of findings from a study that was previously funded by the National Academy of Education and also the Spencer Foundation. And I'm not exactly sure who's in the audience for the discussion today, but I'm going to imagine that you all are connected to college teaching in some way. Likely you have taught in college in some format, or you're responsible for faculty development, or have a role as an administrator, or have an interest in improving college teaching. So please know that I'm really speaking in a way that will, I hope, touch you as a college teacher, as well as you're thinking about college teaching improvement more broadly. So first, there are a couple times when I'm going to ask you in a little bit of reflection. And right now I'd like to engage in a little bit of imagination. I'd like to ask for you to imagine that this apartment building right here represents your college teaching home. You moved in on the day you started any kind of formal education, but over the years, it was adorned with dozens of teachers, teaching experiences from you as a student. You decorated the halls with your own lived experiences, identities, and assumptions. One day in your doctorate, you moved into a room on the 5th floor. Your advisor decorated it just like her own house. You may have read a few books or taken a course on college teaching, so you repainted and you got a new couch. You started your academic career at a university and you invited your students into your teaching home, decorated with your own lived experiences and by your own multiple identities. Perhaps you went to a center for teaching and learning, which helped you expand to an apartment on the top floor. You now live there comfortably. And so do all faculty teach in their own homes with the understanding that this is how teaching is done in this kind of school, in this kind of discipline. And then one day you come to realize what is actually out there. This is what happened to me when I and my research team observed more than 700 college courses across 9 institutions. We have brief time today, so I won't get into the observational protocol, iterated reliability, generalizability study, confirmatory factor analyses, or other validation studies the protocol went through, but I'm happy to send the papers if you'd like to see. Today, I'm going to take a robust look at what I've learned, the new pair of glasses I've been given to the barriers and also opportunities for college teaching improvement. Oops, sorry, let me click to the next, here we go. So first I'd like to take a look at this graph, and it's a lot to start out with, but it really shows, I think, some important information about the how to describe the courses in my study. And first, I want to make sure you all can see my cursor. But if you can see my cursor, I'd like to draw your attention down here to numbers 1 through 7. And you'll see that down on this x-axis here, what we've got is different kinds of teaching practices that we studied in the study. And I also want to draw your attention down here to the different colored lines. And these lines represent different groups of courses, clusters of courses from this latent class analysis, and how likely they are, across this probability up here, how likely they are to enact these different teaching practices. And so I just wanted to point out a few things that I think are interesting. First, if you can take a look at this red line, this is what we've termed traditional lecture. And this was what I think historically might have been seen as, you know, the average teaching practice, although that is changing dramatically. You'll see in our sample, that's only 19% of the courses that fell into that latent class. And those courses were very likely to do a lecture, also likely to have in-depth subject matter knowledge practices, and were somewhat likely to have student questions, but not very likely to have active learning techniques, and also not very likely to connect the subject matter to students' prior knowledge or to support their learning cognitively and emotionally. Now, by contrast, we see that 55% of the courses fell into this group that we termed comprehensive. And what's amazing is that those 55% of the courses in my sample were really doing all of the above. They were doing all of these different practices, or they were likely to engage in all of these different practices. And I think this is so important because if we really look at the college teaching literature base, often there's a dichotomy between lecture and active learning. But what this study showed was that really many classes are doing it all. And in fact, the specific clusters of courses that we saw that were doing one or the other. So for example, the traditional lecture that's doing lecture but not active learning, they were not able to tap students' prior knowledge. And similarly, with the courses that were doing activity, if you look at this this group we're calling active and aimless, this line here, you'll see that those courses certainly were having class activities, but they were not getting at students' prior knowledge, and they were not getting at subject matter. So it really was this nice balance of lecture as well as active learning that seemed to really help have this robust effect with the constellation of practices taking place in the classroom, and wanted to share that as a basis. So I often feel that we focus too much on what college teaching is currently like and less about what's possible within college teaching. And so I'm going to ask you to reflect another minute to stir the imagination of what is possible, of what could be realized in your own teaching or at your own institution. How many faculty have you observed in your own discipline, outside your discipline, in your own institution or in another institution? How about those who share your identities? Or those who don't share your identities? How about those who you know think like you, or those who do not think like you? How about those who have similar students to you, or also those who have different students? Likewise, do your program and department meetings focus on how to better teach to racially and culturally diverse students? Can you conjure in your mind right now someone who teaches differently from you that you'd like to learn from? Do you have conversations about teaching frequently with other faculty? One of the things I've realized in the course of this research agenda is that there are systematic reasons why college teaching is vastly difficult and complex to improve, and we will get to these systematic issues. But first, I want to discuss some common reservations about college teaching improvement that are more about a lack of understanding of what is possible in college teaching. So the first reservation deals with different course contexts and disciplinary contexts, and whether or not it's possible to truly understand students' lived experiences in those contexts. So class size is a big one. Can college teachers in a very large lecture hall actually understand students' lived experiences? And I wanted to share just one class that I observed, a Psych 101 class, that was in a 500-person lecture hall where the faculty member systematically asked different students to share their lived experiences and personal assumptions when it came to the concept of Darwinism. Students then related these experiences with peers. She then asked if any students felt their lived experiences did not resonate with the theory and why. And then asked students to write 3-minute papers in response. The professor asked students to share out if their partner had an experience that was different than all of the experiences previously shared. So this is just one example, but again, it allows us to think about what might be possible. Another misconception is that a college teacher can't use culturally relevant teaching in an engineering class or in the hard sciences. And I think this is a common misperception, but I will say there are incredible researchers like Dr. Felicia Moore-Mensa at Teachers College, who's a professor of science and education, who studies culturally relevant, culturally responsive science teaching and curriculum, more on the K-12 side, but she also runs an outstanding workshop for junior faculty of color as an aside. And so I think that there are really incredible examples of how to do this well, how to support students' lived experiences in the hard sciences. Now, I will say it was indeed true that engineering courses in my study were less likely than other courses to exhibit strong teaching practices. But to improve teaching, we need to think less about what is and more about what is possible. So here's another reservation. This reservation deals with faculty category, and there's always a lot of questions about whether the teaching quality is stronger for tenure stream or non-tenure stream faculty and the way that those different reward structures play out for college teaching. And I will say that in my study, we found that there were no significant differences by faculty category between tenure stream and non-tenure stream faculty on my measures. That there were other things that mattered more, like institutional culture, peer culture, intrinsic motivation, faculty identity, and more. The study did show that faculty of color at 2 regional comprehensive universities were more likely than white faculty to teach using students' prior knowledge and with culturally relevant teaching. So having a diverse college faculty in terms of racial diversity, I do think is deeply important to this as well. And so I also wanted to mention, I heard this once in my research agenda, Harvard shouldn't have to care about good college teaching. And this was from an unnamed Harvard administrator and renowned education researcher. And I would call this the power and prestige argument, that prestigious colleges are focused on, in quotes, more important things than college teaching. And I'd like to examine this a little more closely. I will say that the pulls away from teaching improvement for both faculty and also for institutions are much greater than the draws toward teaching improvement. And my study took a look at how this manifests in the classroom. So in this study, we examined how 4 different college teaching constructs varied in courses at institutions with 3 levels of prestige, as determined by ranking and Carnegie classification. So when we compared courses in highly ranked institutions to those of unranked or low-ranked institutions, an interesting pattern emerged. The courses in high prestige institutions were stronger in the level of cognitive complexity. Surprisingly, the courses in highly ranked institutions were about equal to broad access colleges in the depth of subject matter knowledge. And they were actually lower than broad access institutions in teaching practices that are student-centered based on their lived experiences. In other words, broad access colleges scored higher than highly ranked colleges in the teaching constructs that matter for all students, and particularly for diverse learners. Although the higher education measures and rankings don't value college teaching, the public does. In a representative sample of the US public, actually co-conducted by Erin Pallas here on this panel, I had an opportunity to contribute to a few items on this survey. People were asked, what is the most important factor in what makes the best college or university? And among a variety of factors, from job placement to research expertise, to salary of alums, to sports teams even, we asked what they thought, and the public picked college teaching as the most important factor. So the ideal would be if students in all universities encountered most courses that were using evidence-based practices for supporting learning in college classrooms. This requires teaching supportive institutions that have policies, practices, and cultures that support teaching as a priority. When I think about my research, when I think across my research, perhaps the thing that is most striking to me is that the norm may not yet be exemplary college teaching in US higher education. And certainly there are variations in how frequently exemplary teaching is happening by various contexts, by institutional context, by discipline, and by course contexts. However, there are examples of individual faculty in every discipline, hard sciences or humanities, in every institutional context, prestigious research institutions and broad access colleges, and in every class context, large or small classes, and even across faculty categories, whether tenured or adjunct. And there are certain institutions where exemplary college teaching is happening for students. If we better understand what is possible for college teaching, and we also examine and improve the motivations for college teaching, and allow institutions that are excellent at college teaching to tout their successes to the public that we know deeply values college teaching, perhaps exemplary college teaching could be the norm in US higher education. Thank you, and I will pass it off to Aram and look forward to your questions.
Actually, thank you so much, Corbin. That was really entrancing. I mean, there's so much there to dig into, and you covered a lot of extremely interesting material. Thank you again. So turn it over to Richard.
Thank you so much, and it's really exciting to be on a panel with Erin and Corbin. I'm a huge fan of both of their work. And what I have to add to this discussion is really a few data points on what is happening at this moment in time in terms of instruction and student learning. We're in, a very unusual times. And I think the current reality is very useful to consider because it challenges some of the stories of continuity in terms of pedagogy and instruction that we hear from many of our historian colleagues. And it also challenges some of the historical work that has really been very skeptical of the effects of technology in changing teaching and learning. And so I'll present this based on a project that's occurring at UC Irvine. It's funded by the Andrew Mellon Foundation, and it involves more than a dozen faculty members, interdisciplinary faculty members across 5 different schools at UC Irvine that are all collaborating on this project. First, I'll share with you a quick slide on the project overall, and then move to the findings. The project's goals were to develop and disseminate new measures of undergraduate experiences, trajectories, and outcomes to use this new measurement system to inform institutional improvement efforts and to advance educational equity at UCI and also in the field of higher education more broadly, and also to deepen our understanding of educational processes. We are doing this by creating an integrated data system that really gathers unprecedented data on student experiences. We are including in this data a wealth, a depth of administrative data that includes everything from college application materials to college transcripts to interactions of students with support services on campus, academic advising, academic tutoring, career services, and the like. All this data is integrated with data that's derived from the learning management system at UCI, where we're able to generate for every student in every class measures of academic engagement in the LMS system, in the Canvas system that we use at UCI. And those academic engagement measures are integrated with the administrative data. And then for 1,200 students that we began to follow in fall 2019, and a new cohort that we began of 1,200 students we began to follow in fall 2020, we've done extensive surveys. Those 1,200 students receive 8 surveys per year that ask about important things to this discussion, including what their experiences were in class in terms of teaching and learning. A subsample of a third of those 1,200 students receive surveys on a weekly basis that go even to greater depth about their experiences in classroom and out of classrooms. We also use experiential sampling with these students, as well as an innovative set of performance assessments that we developed in collaboration with ETS, which I don't have time to discuss on this panel, but I mention here just for your edification. So we began this study, as I said, in fall 2019, following students with those original goals in mind. But then, of course, something happened in the winter term at UCI. By the end of the winter term in March 2020, of course, the pandemic hit campus. At that time, the finals were removed to remote administration. The students were told to go home if at all possible. And from March onward, instruction has been remote. I also mentioned another exogenous shock that kind of hit the campus and US higher education. On May 25th, George Floyd was killed, and the growing Black Lives Matter movement has also had tremendous effects, I believe, on campus life, as well as the country, that could also, we're monitoring in our study. Think, for example, we have in the School of Education dozens of faculty working to decolonize their syllabi as a result of this tragic event that occurred. But again, I'm going to talk for this presentation on the effects of the pandemic and the move to remote instruction on changing practices around instruction and different patterns of student learning on campus. So the pandemic hits. Many of us, educators all across the country, as well as students, were deeply concerned that their academic progress was going to be severely impacted by these events. And so here you have, from spring 2020, the term immediately, the first term, they're fully remote. A question, student responses on their degree of concern around whether or not the move to remote classes will interrupt their academic progress. You'll see they were very concerned about this, as the educators and administrators at UCI and elsewhere were as well. And they had reason to be concerned, of course, because they moved home, they had new responsibilities. They also had serious resource constraints in trying to navigate the new learning environment. The students at UCI, 85% of them identify as students from non-white backgrounds. 50% are first-generation students. And these students, many of them said they did not have a quiet study place 7 days a week. They did not have stable internet connections, and they faced resource challenges as well as having to deal with new responsibilities. So with all these concerns, what in fact happened at UCI? Well, here you see from fall 2019, and on the right-hand column, make sure you can see that in the faces aren't blocking it. You see that in fact that wasn't the worst fears were not realized at all. In fact, in terms of completed course credits, they remained stable. The grade point averages actually increased, and the student retention increased from fall 2019 to fall 2020. Now, that requires every time social scientists are surprised by the findings, it leads one to interrogate the data and try to understand what explains this pattern. And I'm going to argue here today that what partially explains this pattern is that students and faculty adapted to the changing circumstances and altered the pedagogical experiences that occurred on campus. And so again, to make that case, first I'll show, here we have, remember I showed you the access to resources and the relationship to term completed credits. So on the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see the access to various resources, study places, stable internet connections, and so on, and how many completed course credits they had. And this one on the left is from spring 2020. And you'll see students who had these significant resource constraints were severely impacted in terms of their academic progress in spring 2020. But look what happens by the time fall 2020 moves around. By then, there is no relationship really at all between access to these resources and academic progress. And why is that case? I'll hypothesize that what happened over the summer at UCI happened in many college campuses across the country. The university incentivized and supported faculty working in teams, working with pedagogical resource supports to modify their curriculum and instruction, to move to more asynchronous delivery, and to incorporate more active learning into their pedagogical environment. So it wasn't the case that what they were doing before the pandemic was the same thing as what faculty were doing later on in the pandemic. In fact, they moved, I'll argue, to more flexibility in their delivery. They moved to more active learning methods, and again, I'll show you some evidence that supports that conjecture. First, though, in terms of academic engagement, because you could also make the counter argument, oh yeah, the grade point averages went up and the students were completing more credits because everyone just got easier and more lenient on the students and faculty gave grades, high grades for less work than they normally would. But we found when we looked at the LMS data that academic engagement significantly went up in these systems. And that was the case here, very important, not just in courses overall, because one could argue, well, you're not meeting in person, everything is mediated now through the LMS. So of course the LMS data, academic engagement moved up. But at UCI, we had 15% of our courses online prior to the pandemic. And so the blue lines here, when you look just at the online, fully online courses prior to the pandemic and after the pandemic, you see that even in the courses that were already online, they have increased academic engagement. Students are potentially have more time. They're spending less time on socializing and pursuing leisure pursuits. And so the academic engagement is rising, and it's rising in part because of student adaptation, but it's also potentially rising because changes in pedagogy. And here, these are student reports of fall 2019 and fall 2020, the percentage of class time used for different activities. Look at that first row. We see that in fall 2019, the students reported that 79% of class time was in lectures. By fall 2020, when it's remote, that drops to 57%. And look what also happens with discussion and other classroom activities. That moves up from 16% to 39%. And at the bottom row, you see, similar to the LMS data, the amount of study time and preparing for class and doing homework, that also increases from 6.5 to 8.84. And so what we see here is a pattern. This is from the student's perspective, student learning perspectives, and slightly different than Corbin's observational methods so this is subject to students' perceptions of their classroom experience and their recollections of it. We see that students are reporting less lecturing, more active learning, and more academic engagement. And arguably, some of these things are going to continue post-pandemic. And this is the final empirical slide I'm going to show you. They're going to persist post-pandemic, I believe, because our lived experiences, remember what Corbin said? We moved into that fifth story apartment with our, based on our lived experiences and the comfortable couch that we added to what we had experienced earlier on in our lives. Our lived experiences have changed. Going back to Aaron's point, no one wanted to power up, but we powered up over the past year and a half. It might not have been the full-on power version, Aaron, of personalized instruction that ties to neuroscience, but it was technologically enhanced instruction like no one ever imagined before. And the whole sector did it overnight. And that lived experience, how can it not change our preferences for what we want? And so here, this figure here, we asked students January this year, so that's about 3 months ago. Once the pandemic ends, do you want your classes online or in person? And look here, these are the two cohorts, the fall 2019 and the fall 2020 cohort, many of which the students have experienced their entire higher education online. What they say is the modal category is they say they want some classes online and some classes in person. That is, they don't want to move back to all classes in person, but nor do they want to stay all classes in online. They want a mixture. And so at UCI, we're expecting that we're going to move from 15% online to probably 25% of our course delivery online. And we expect that in many of our large lectures, we're going to, they're going to have a hybrid character with more asynchronous material, class discussions, discussion boards and the like, that encourage active learning. And so the world has changed because of this exogenous shock that hit higher education. And here's I'm presenting the students, student reports of what they want, but I can also tell you just from my personal experiences as an administrator, many faculty have also grown fond of this new pedagogical delivery and are eager to continue, either fully or some aspects of what they've experimented with and what they've built over the past 12, 18 months. So in conclusion, the project, first we demonstrated that we could build new measures and we could integrate all these measures together in a system that better captured undergraduate experiences, trajectories, and outcomes. We also showed that at UCI, and again, I wouldn't generalize these findings, UCI has a particular type of student. It's highly selected, even though it's very, very diverse student body. It also is a university that invests a lot, has invested for years in active learning and supporting pedagogy, and has all sorts of institutional resources, including this project, which helped inform how it responded to the pandemic. But what we see is that the resource constraints and expanded responsibilities did not have negative effects on academic outcomes. We see actually the opposite, positive effects. And again, that was because of the adaptations that occurred. And the argument I'm making is that preferences have also changed as a result of the lived experiences of students and faculty and the institutions themselves. So with that said, I will turn it back to the panel as a whole, and I'm sure we all would welcome questions.
Great. Thank you, Richard. This is great. You've each touched on the same issue from slightly different perspectives, and I think that's been very, very helpful. We have time for a few questions where we don't have a lot of time, but let me start one, which is a follow-up to Richard's final point, that when the pandemic hit, universities responded remarkably quickly to go online. I mean, I, as a longtime educator and university leader, it astonished me how quickly universities around the country responded. But we're about to transition back, and many universities are in a rush to go back to in-person teaching in the fall. Richard talked about the UCI response to that. Let me ask the panel, do you think more broadly within American higher education, this transition back to in-person teaching provides an opportunity to make better use of engaged learning techniques that we all agree is so important moving forward?
I think we learned a lot over the last 18 months about teaching practice. And I think one of the great things about the pandemic, if one can look for a silver lining, was the willingness of faculty to share their experiences, their techniques. I found a book about how to teach effectively with Zoom that was terrific. I learned a lot from that. Faculty member at Harvard who published it very quickly last spring. And I think we will continue to draw on good practice in ways that are more than just, here's the technical solution to being able to use 2 screens or whatever those things might be. It's much more substantive, much more thoughtful. And I do expect that that will continue. But I also think there's a certain amount of segmentation. I mean, UCI has a particular place in the higher ed system. Other institutions do as well. There's going to be, I think, probably a lot more pressure for returning to face-to-face instruction in institutions whose missions and public presentations have always emphasized their ability to provide that kind of customized experience. Selective private liberal arts colleges probably being the ideal type of that kind of institution.
Great.
I just wanted
ahead,
to add
Corbin.
as well, just briefly, that I think that one of the other things that we've deeply learned from this time is that, you know, we always talk about higher education as being a slow changing industry, right? We really talk about higher ed as, but actually when forced, we can change incredibly quickly. And I wonder, you know, if we had the same sort of, you know, need to change pressure about changing to online that we did to, for example, connecting to Richard's conversation about Black Lives Matter, if we had that same press to become anti-racist teachers, right? You know, how quickly could we, you know, on a dime make that change? And then just lastly, the one opportunity that I think that we have that we really need to focus on and capitalize on is that I think faculty often change through collegial structures, meaning through conversation among each other, through peer discussions. And there has been more faculty to faculty conversations about teaching, I think, in this period than perhaps ever before. It has really opened up that collegial possibility for teaching improvement. We often talk about organizational practices or individual improvement, but this level of the sort of collegial faculty environment and how that can improve teaching, I feel like there's a real opportunity to capitalize upon there.
But the irony of Corbin's point is that if faculty are not returning to campus in the ways that they did prior to the pandemic, there will be fewer structured opportunities to run into people in the hallway and have those conversations about teaching. That is, I think, a long-term issue that many administrators, I imagine, are worrying about. How do we retain the sense of collective responsibility, not only for teaching, but for the institution overall, if faculty are not present because the nature of instruction doesn't propel them to be on campus as much as they used to.
Yeah.
Those are really good points.
Good point. Yeah, let me just add just two things to there. One is students will vote with their feet. They'll enroll in courses they want, and they will drive change in ways that are, you know, I'm a sociologist. I can't, you know, I'm not very good at predicting it, but a lot of what will transpire will be driven by student demand and student interest. Yeah, I'll leave it just with that point.
Well, let me follow up in a slightly different way. I was thinking about Corbin's apartment building and traveling through it over the course of a career. And one of the things that we don't really do in higher education at the graduate level is train our future teachers, our future professors in pedagogy. Most faculty who've actually adopted advanced techniques of interactive learning, taking into account students' histories, et cetera, those are skills that they've acquired subsequent to being appointed to the faculty. The skills they may have learned from colleagues or skills they may have learned from centers for teaching and learning. So my question is, are we being remiss in our graduate programs and in terms of our graduate requirements in not actually training future college professors during their graduate careers to become professors and excellent teachers?
Yes, I think we are remiss. And there are, I think, there is a growing number of preparing future faculty programs, often funded through philanthropic organizations, to cultivate the teaching of specific things. That's the thing I think that's most critical. Campus teaching and learning centers are great with regard to general pedagogical knowledge. They're not great, for the most part, in teaching a physics teacher how to teach a particular thermodynamics principle. The pedagogical content knowledge of how to teach something in particular typically resides within departments. So it's some amalgam between campus-wide centers and department-specific knowledge about how to teach specific subjects, or disciplinary associations, because Richard led a project to try to look at how disciplinary associations could cultivate a good teaching of specific disciplinary knowledge. But yes, I think it's certainly something that is an overlooked opportunity at the moment.
Yeah, I would agree.
Oh, go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I would agree with the comment and concern in general, but again, strange things happened during the pandemic. So at UCI, one of the more powerful interventions that occurred was that we have graduate students who are trained as pedagogical fellows, is the title. And the pedagogical fellows were empowered over the summer to work with groups of faculties that came together in their own disciplines, much to Aaron's, supporting Aaron's point that it's gotta be, has to be disciplinary based for various reasons. And the pedagogical fellows, the grad students, helped support the faculty in adopting the new technology because they were often more adept at its use than the faculty were. And so here was a strange, I 100% agree with the general point that we need to provide better support in our PhD programs for pedagogical how to engage in pedagogical, develop pedagogical knowledge and the like, but we shouldn't have a deficit-based approach. We should see that they carry their own assets, these young PhD students, to the table as well, and we can learn from them.
And I would just add that we then have to hire great teachers, right? So if we're going to prepare, right now, a lot of preparation focuses on research because of course that is, you go to do a research talk, right? But if we were also hiring for great teachers, I think we do need to think about the motivational factors as well to support this change process as well. But I appreciate Richard's comment that we don't need to come from a deficit mindset about those graduate students. In fact, we're learning deeply from them and we should reward them for that by giving them faculty jobs.
That's a really good point. Hiring the best teachers and making sure we promote the best teachers as well. Sadly, I have to tell you, we are out of time. This was really fascinating. I think we all came to understand a lot more about the newer teaching methods and how important they are in terms of student success, because ultimately we are all, of course, committed to student success. And so I really want to thank all of you, Aaron, Corbin, and Richard, for a really fascinating hour together. Thank you all so much. And on behalf of the Center for Studies in Higher Education, to all of those